Welcome everybody. So nice to see you here on a Sunday morning in beautiful Aspen. This is the panel on civic action for good. So if you're in the wrong place, now is the moment, although this is going to be a great panel. So welcome everybody. I want to introduce our panelists, starting with Jennifer Polka. Jennifer is the co-founder of Code for America. She's also the former Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the White House of Science and Technology Policy. Welcome, Jennifer. And sitting to Jennifer's right, we have Tom Wilson, the president and CEO of the Allstate Corporation and Allstate Insurance Company. And Tom has held a variety of positions at Allstate. He's also a board member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And welcome to Tom. Jennifer Anastasoff is the co-founder and CEO of FuseCore. FuseCore enlists entrepreneurial professionals to tackle the nation's most pressing problems through a one-year fellowship. And I'm not going to tell you more because I'm going to have her tell you more in just a moment. And then sitting right here is Stephen Olakara. Stephen is the co-founder and president of the Millennial Action Project, a national organization dedicated to revitalizing American politics through the next generation post-partisan leadership. So welcome everybody. So nice to have you here on this Sunday morning, this early Sunday morning. Jennifer, I think that the best way to begin, because civic action and civic engagement is such a broad topic, right? And there's so many ways for people to engage, and it's changed so much because of the digital revolution. So I think what I would like to do to begin with is have each of you just kind of give an overview about the perspective that you bring to this panel. So Jennifer, let me begin with you, and from your perspective, from Code for America.
Sure. So I'm one of two Jennifers who works on public service fellowship programs.
That's clearly the name to have, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a bad name.
It's not a bad name. So from Code for America's perspective, just briefly, our mission, as we phrase it, is we believe that government can work for the people, by the people, in the 21st century. And so when we think about that for the people part, we're talking about better service delivery primarily. We're talking about what the government can do for citizens that it's not doing well enough yet, and all of the ways in which all the advantages of technology today that have accrued primarily to the private sector need also to accrue to the public sector. But we think a lot about that other piece, the by the people part. It's always been part of the founding of this country, but we've lost it a little. But one of the reasons we're excited about technology, and not for technology's sake, but is because it allows us to let people participate in new ways. It's actually really in old ways, but with sort of lower costs of communication, lower costs of coordination. So our fellows that come to work with city governments for a year, they're typically developers and designers from startups or big tech companies like Google or Apple. They're not just building apps that make cities work better, they're building apps that let people use their hands, not just their voices. There are ways in which you can actually help do the work that cities used to rely just on the government to do. The same way that we now crowdsource an encyclopedia, and it's a fantastic encyclopedia. We can actually figure out ways to crowdsource the business of government in such a way that's not just, this is what I want, but this is what I'm willing to do, and this is what I'm willing to, and helping out using a web browser, more likely, text messaging or your smartphone.
And we're going to talk a lot more about the kinds of projects and the kinds of things that people are engaging in the way that you describe it. Tom, talk to us a little bit about Allstate and its civic engagement. Obviously, that's a little bit more of a traditional model, although you're involved in very interesting projects, but it's more, it comes to us from a larger institution. But tell us about your definition of civic engagement.
Well, our definition of civic engagement would be broad, so everything from philanthropy to volunteering to political engagement. And we do it because we believe people are our key asset, and civic engagement is good for people. So if you think about what that does for you, first you get to bring your conscience with you. You get to do it the way you want to do it. Secondly, you get some personal growth out of it, so you meet new people, learn new skills. At the same time, it's good for us in our local communities because it enhances our reputation there. It also is just good. If you're a net investor in America, then you want America to be better. We're a net investor in America. So it's good for our people. It's good for our business. If you go way above that, I think the ultimate goal is to help people achieve their purpose in life. And when we let our employees, we give them time off, we have fellowships, we have all kinds of stuff where we get people engaged in the community, it helps them achieve their purpose in life. And when they get that, then they're just much better employees.
Jennifer, let's talk about Fuse Corps, because it's such an interesting concept. Can you let everybody know what it is that Fuse Corps does?
Sure. So what Fuse Corps does, it's an organization that takes the nation's top minds in business and in entrepreneurship and places them in a one-year fellowship as a senior advisor to a mayor or governor. And these are folks who have on average 15 years, 16 years of experience in their jobs. These are folks who are mid-career. And the idea is to create a space for innovation in government and to do it at the top levels so that really amazing innovations can actually be happening at lower levels. And just as for an example of that, Fuse Corps, one of Fuse Corps' executive fellows was a former head of mobile at Nokia and ended up working with the city of San Francisco, which was very open to this, but ended up working with the city of San Francisco to create the first entrepreneurship in residence program for a city. So that kind of thing is what someone who has executive experience can help with. And to change the frame just a little bit, I think civic engagement's really great, and I think the Jennifers would probably agree on this, that civic entrepreneurship is largely what we need right now. And that bringing in folks who have a different set of experiences, a different path, and that could be any one of you as well, into government for a period to be civic entrepreneurs is critical to getting things going.
Stephen, I want to tell you about something about Stephen. He was named Millennial of the Year. I love that title. I want a card that says Millennial of the Year, except for, oops, I'm not a millennial. But anyway, when it comes to the millennials, though, and civic engagement, it's a really interesting story. Stephen, tell us a little bit about the Millennial Action Project.
Well, first, good morning to everyone. And I just want to say first thanks to Perry for moderating this and to the Aspen Institute for shining a spotlight on what I think is a really crucial topic. As you mentioned, the millennial generation is about to fundamentally transform politics, and in some ways, it's already happening. And as both Jennifers have mentioned, we do need a new generation of civic entrepreneurs, and that's what the Millennial Action Project is dedicated to, specifically in the legislative context. We think one of the greatest threats to our generation and our democracy is that the levels of polarization in Congress are at the highest levels they've been since the end of Reconstruction. Congressional approval ratings are down to 7%. About half of all millennials don't think that politics can solve the challenges that our country faces. So what does that mean? It means that we have to restore faith and trust in not just government, but the whole political process. And so what the Millennial Action Project does is we work with this rising generation of millennials as they're entering public office. And we create caucuses of legislators. We call them future caucuses. And we started the first millennial-led caucus in the United States Congress, and we launched it last year. And it's co-chaired by the youngest woman in Congress, Tulsi Gabbard, and the youngest Republican in Congress, Aaron Schock.
How old?
They're both 33 years old.
Okay, just wanted to know.
And currently the youngest member of Congress is 30. So there are 0 20-somethings in Congress. And that was actually the initial spark, because a few years ago, then the youngest member, Congressman Aaron Schock, said, you know, the caucus of 20-somethings is really lonely. And it was funny, but it was true and alarming that this generation is substantially underrepresented in Congress. But what we're finding is that this generation is now 50% independent. Across all generations, the fastest rising political affiliation is independent. So there's a willingness to challenge the party labels and a willingness to challenge the status quo. And we're trying to create a space for that, not just in Congress, but in state legislatures across the country, and that's how we're scaling our model, is we now have a growing network of state-based future caucuses, and ultimately we're going to create a generation of policymakers who believe that cooperation is the best way to govern our country.
So Stephen says politics can't solve our problems. That's the way the millennials are seeing it. Jennifer, government doesn't necessarily have to solve those problems any longer, the way that technology has really disrupted civic engagement.
I think that's true. I think that actually in the audience is Tim O'Reilly, who originally articulated this idea of government as a platform, which you can think of essentially, go back to 2007 when the iPhone was really new. It's just, you forget how cool it was then. A platform came with some fantastic apps, but then, and showed what's possible, so sort of set the bar in terms of quality, and then anybody could build apps on top of it. I think government really can do the same thing, and my boss in the White House, Todd Park, I think did a fantastic job setting the agenda for the nation, saying if we open our nation's data and other assets like that, people can build on that. So we've done a lot of that at the local level. When you talk about some of the apps that the Code for America fellows have built that let people use their hands, not just their voices, it's all built on open data. The first one was a sort of trivial example of letting people dig out fire hydrants in Boston when they were covered with snow. Kind of sick of talking about that one in some ways. There were some more profound applications of it as it spread in Honolulu, where if the tsunami siren doesn't work, this is a very big problem. But if the batteries are taken from the tsunami sirens, which they often are, the city can't go around and check those. So we let people adopt a tsunami siren and check on it to make sure that it's still working and report it back to the city when it isn't. That's all premised on open data. You have to have the locations of the tsunami sirens, put them out on a map, let the citizens do something with it, let them create an app, let them do the adoption. So these things actually enable government as a platform. But to get back to Steve's point, and I think the reason the folks that I work with primarily in Silicon Valley, or is what Todd likes to call metaphysical Silicon Valley, are interested in this and come to it from an implementation standpoint or a how can we do something cool standpoint. They don't believe that politics can solve the problem. They want to just get down to the work of making things work better. But they also get that government as a platform is not left or right. It is not Democrat or Republican. Sure, you can have smaller government within that context, but it's really about the right-sized government and everyone getting their own needs met because they're empowered to meet them themselves.
Tom, how do the corporations embody this changing platform, this changing world of civic engagement? Is this a challenge or is this an enhancement?
The technology?
Yeah.
I think corporations, we figure out how to use technology. So we did some stuff on safe driving, and we put
Do you want to tell everybody about that initiative? I thought that was really interesting.
So 11 kids die every day in car accidents. They don't need to. 30 to 40% of them could be saved just by teaching them how to drive better and different, giving them privileges later in life. So one of the things we did was we called it Save 11, and we used technology to create basically an electronic Vietnam veterans wall where people could post pictures of their children who had died, do testimony. It was very cathartic for the people, but then we used those stories because logic doesn't really work. You say 11, somebody gets it, politician, it's 40 people die and other kind of violence a day. So the numbers don't mean much. You really got to tell stories. So we would use those electronic stories to tell the mission. But I think there's something else here that I'd like to pick up on what Jennifer said, which is about empowering people. I think politics is necessary, but I think social protest, nonviolent social protest, is a tool that needs to be used more. And by that, I mean, so what is nonviolent social protest? Everything from signing a petition to going to a march to boycotting somebody economically, to civil disobedience. And if you look at that over the history of our country, it's been a key driver of political change. And it seems to not be used as much today when it's probably easier to do nonviolent protests today than it ever has been in the past. It needs to be done because voting's just not enough. Like, it's great we elect people, but you vote every 2 years, maybe they listen to you, maybe they told you the truth, maybe they don't tell you the truth. It is a non-consultative process. We all feel guilty if we don't do it. So, you know, I don't know about you, but, you know, it's like election day and I don't know if I want to get up at 5:30 to vote before I go to work or want to leave work early to vote. And I feel guilty if I don't. But I don't feel guilty if I don't socially protest. I think we should feel guilty if we don't socially protest because we need to engage that way. Could be through technology, could be this, but it really has driven a lot of change around the world. And there's a great book called While Civil Disobedience Works that talks, it goes over a 50-year period that looks at how civil disobedience creates more positive political change, has a greater success rate than violence. And so civil disobedience can drive it. And I think that's part of civic engagement, and we should welcome it. So instead of, like, I tried to Google, like, protest and bad, you get, like, reams of connections between that, as opposed to, like, we should welcome people who protest.
Jennifer, we're talking about politics not being able to answer the problems. We're talking about the millennials. Yet you're placing people into the government structure, so you have a unique perspective on this. Can you talk a little bit about how that's working and what you see from that perspective?
Sure, and I should say that as of Tuesday, I'm not speaking for FuseCorps, I'm speaking as myself, because I'm off to do writing. But, you know, it's interesting, 10 years ago, I like to say 10 years ago, I would not have expected or seen mayors saying, hey, we want people who have a different perspective, who are from business, who are entrepreneurs, to come in and to be senior advisors to help us think about innovation. It just wasn't as welcoming of an atmosphere for that. And what's been very interesting to watch as FuseCorps developed over the past 3 years has been to see not only sort of high-level leaders being open to taking on folks who understand how to scale, right? We talk about scale, it seems, you know, it's an abstract term, but gosh, I just have to bring up an example. We talk about charter schools a lot, and love them or hate them, they actually only impact about 5% of the student population, right? Thinking about all of the press that charters get, gosh, that 5% of the student population. So if you think that there should be more people impacted, then you care about scale at that level. If you think some other big change should be happening in education, then you're thinking about scale. And actually, that's hard work, and it's something that's going to have to be done by folks who are going to do, you know, roll up their sleeves and start digging. And so what we found is there is no dearth of people who have a business experience, entrepreneurial experience, who want to do this, as long as they know that there are people on the other side who are going to A, welcome them in some way, shape, or form, and B, be ready for the types of skills that they have. And so programs like a FuseCorps, and I hope more are created, but programs like a FuseCorps basically say, we're gonna help translate. And we're gonna help with this culture clash between business and government so that it can be productive. At a time, a unique time in our history, when governments are open to it and people are ready to go.
Steve, I'm curious to get your take on what Jennifer's saying and then to ask you a question about the millennial distrust of government, and yet this is an incredibly civically minded group.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting trends right now is the millennial generation is highly idealistic, and the number one priority for them, for us, as we're thinking about choosing our careers, is what type of impact are we having on our communities? That is the number one thing. And there are a lot of theories around why that is, but our generation has graduated off a cliff into historic unemployment, historic student loan debt, but are still highly idealistic. I think you combine those things together and you get the growth, really the explosion of social entrepreneurship among our generation. But as Jennifer just mentioned, nothing scales a solution like public policy. Nothing. And I mean, especially at the federal level, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. If you found a good solution, you should be, testifying on the Hill, talking to the Future Caucus, and we want to find out how we can help you scale that. We just actually sponsored the Future Caucus, the first federal legislation on social impact bonds, and that's a great idea where you're going to leverage a lot of private capital into programs that are traditionally sponsored by the public and scale them across the country. And if they produce a return in terms of the in terms of the results they were prescribed to create, they'll get a return on investment. So that's the case that I would make now. We've seen a generation get into social entrepreneurship, but now we have to realize that if we really want to scale these solutions that we're doing in the private sector, we have to make sure our generation is engaging in public policy too.
Steve, given that, I'm curious, is there a brain drain then to Washington?
Well, I think there is. So for a long time, there was, an issue, I think some people would say, that the best and brightest of our generation was going into financial services and consulting and industries that some people would say aren't as, say, socially productive as working in public service or becoming an entrepreneur. But that's starting to change, and I think the financial collapse facilitated that transition. So I think there is unfortunately still brain drain in Congress, and I see it firsthand. I think people who have tremendous amount of expertise on a topic probably aren't becoming legislative aides to members of Congress. And that's something you have to change. I mean, the incentives aren't there. Pay is extremely low right now. The gridlock is obviously at historic levels. Brookings just did a study finding that the gridlock is the worst it's been in the past 20 years. It's doubled since the 1950s. So if you're a young, idealistic person and you want to make change, and you want to make change fast, Congress is probably not the place right now to do that. And that's obviously what we have to change, because our democracy is only as strong as the people who participate in it. And that's why we need to make sure we're creating pathways so our best and brightest are going into public service, including Congress and other legislative capacities.
No question about it. I'd like to open up and let you ask questions of our panelists. Right there. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is for Tom and for Jennifer.
Oh, wait, hold on. I think you need a mic. It's coming. Mic is on its way. Mic is there. Okay.
My question is for Tom and Jennifer. Jennifer, you mentioned the importance of open data, the government opening up data so that we can do more with it. And Tom, I know that a lot of what Allstate does, especially thinking about that DriveWise example, is about collecting data to make better products for individuals. What do you guys think about the issue around privacy and how much data access depends upon also protecting the rights of individuals? Do you think that there are opportunities to have individuals voluntarily provide their data almost in a Facebook manner so that we can sort of go around some of the privacy limitations to innovation?
Sure.
It's an interesting question.
Do you want to start?
I'll give you my view. Yes, I think they should. I think the challenge right now is the way the law is constructed is you have to give that to every institution you engage with. So we're doing something on anti-violence in Chicago. If you're in 5 different programs, mentoring, after school, whatever, you have to give all of them a permission to get your data. So if you're trying to look at the collective impact of all of those things together, you can't get the data. Because first they got to tell every one of those 4 or 5 organizations, then you got to get those 4 or 5 organizations to give it to you in the same format, and it just doesn't work. So I think if we could create some way where people could collectively, I like the idea of sort of, let yourself, because it's really about the individual. When you're trying to help people, it's about the individual, not about the programs. It would be a great benefit.
I think it's a really complicated issue, and I'm glad you raised it. I think one of the things I'd say is when you're talking about like the location of fire hydrants, there's an enormous amount of data that can be used to make your community better, that it does not violate anyone's privacy except maybe the fire hydrant itself. But when we do get into personal data, there are no easy answers here. I know that there are benefits, though, to if you can safely anonymize the data. I'll give you an example. When we were working in Boston, the first year, we ended up doing this sort of other project. What they started out with us wanting to work on was a kid in an after-school program. There's no way right now to be able to say, there's a ton of data, but it's all siloed and you can't get at it. And there's such concerns about the kid's privacy, that you can't actually aggregate that data and say, you know what, we know for this kid with his learning profile and his home situation and where he lives, this would be the right after-school program that is the most likely to get that kid back on track or whatever the issue is. The data exists to make that decision in a much smarter way, but fears about privacy keep us from making those decisions. And I could tell you an example of that in criminal justice, in social services, all over the map. So while I'm very much an advocate of keeping this stuff in a way that we don't violate people's privacy, I also want to just inject the societal value of that into the conversation.
Great, thank you. Question? Microphone is coming behind you.
Hi, my question is for Stephen. When you're thinking about getting millennials into government service, and I don't mean for Congress because there's no job description for Congress, how do you think about government HR? A few years ago, I joined government service, and the HR description for the role was like the most depressing thing I'd ever read, and it was also the most awesome job I had ever had. And so I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm part of a program called the Truman Scholarship. And the Truman Scholarship was created as a memorial to President Truman to help and recruit the best and brightest young people into government service. And what's really interesting is they have a fellowship program right after you graduate, and they place you in any number of the agencies. The most popular ones seem to be Department of Transportation, Department of Justice, Department of Energy, these big federal agencies. To a person, every person is frustrated and knows exactly why they didn't want to serve in government in the first place, or why they were scared about going into government service. Because, and I didn't participate in that fellowship, but what I hear from a lot of my friends was they weren't incentivized to innovate. They weren't, the structures are very hierarchical. And so again, I think if you want to be involved in the federal government or government at any level, you have to feel like the work you're producing is producing results, and that it's meaningful to the people around you. And unfortunately, I think we need a dramatic, radical change in the HR system, specifically in the federal government, so that we are really recruiting and incentivizing more talented young people to come in. And I use the Truman example because if these Truman Fellows are dissatisfied with their government service, that's a problem. I mean, they're the ones who are committing their lives to public service, and they're dissatisfied with the federal government. So that's something that needs to change.
Could I build on that for a second? So as a corporate guy, right, like we're a Fortune 50 company, we know how to run our business, we're highly efficient and effective. And when you look at the US government, the federal government, it is the worst managed organization I have ever seen. Everywhere you go, I've been in meetings, I've been with secretaries. They don't have any objectives, goals. It's ridiculous. And you could take Jennifer's idea and you could ask business people to come help you figure out how to be effective. It doesn't even have to be efficient, okay? If it was just effective. And what they do...
You're not raising that bar too high.
Yeah, right. Well, I think sometimes government shouldn't be that efficient. Like, I think government should just,
right.
It does not need to run on a kind of margin that a business runs on. But if you go to Jennifer's thing, and you look at what the U.S. government does, they ask executives to come in, be on some panel, and talk about policy. They never ask a series of senior executives, come in, the Department of Defense procurement system is broken, help us rip this thing apart and start over. I can tell you, like in my space, in the flood insurance program. We all know the flood insurance program's broke. It spends billions of dollars of our money a year. People's houses get washed away. They build them right up in the same place, and they knock away 2 years later, and they rebuild them. And like, we could fix that, okay? We could help them fix it. It would take 10 years of hard work on their part, but they really have no interest because the politicians are like, that's not my gig. Like, I'm on policy, and I get voted on, and so it's just, I think if you could take Jennifer's concept and expand it to effectiveness, we could make a huge difference. I mean, this is a $2 trillion enterprise. $2 trillion a year they spend of your money, and it's not done well.
Why do you think I throw this out to the panel in general, why doesn't government do a better job? I know I had an experience also. I was asked to be a part of a panel to help about the communications of the Health Reform Act, and it was, to say it was dysfunctional, it would be an understatement, and it didn't get anywhere. And I'm curious why we're having this with the incredible amount of talent and people who do want to engage.
Well, I just have to put out there before Jen speaks that we put the fun in dysfunctional. But, and then Jen can speak and I'll add.
That too, yes. So this is like my favorite question ever, and I think when I die I'll have like the complete answer to it, and until then it will be incomplete. But the reason that, I spent an enormous time on procurement when I was in the White House, for instance, a lot of time. There's two things. We look for compliance with processes instead of outcomes. Actually, it's the same thing. And when your system is driven towards compliance, that's what you're going to get. And that's why healthcare.gov failed, et cetera. Well, it didn't fail. It enrolled 8 million people in heroic effort, but at first it failed. But when I came to this whole agenda, I came to it from the perspective that the smart people that I knew in Silicon Valley were going to be able to save government. Because they knew how to do things, we just get them in, it'll all be fixed. Turns out those things that block you, sometimes it is, what we say, is it law? Is it policy? Is it regulation? Is it just the practice? Is it culture? Is it just the way things are done? There's actually no law behind it. But some of those things actually are law. And if you want to blame someone for the really ridiculous number and complexity of laws that govern how you get stuff done in government, the person to blame is yourself. We created that. We elected the people that did that. We said, we don't trust you, government, to do the right thing, so we're going to build in all of these different ways that we're going to check and balance on you. The procurement system is absolutely an outcome of lack of trust between government and citizens. We're not going to fix that until we fix this fundamental thing where we start working together again. But it is our fault.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I want to build on the our fault comment, because one of the biggest challenges, when you think about government taking risks, right? And people have talked about that. We have innovation in government. And people in government will talk about it, and they mean it, right? And as citizens, we talk about it and we mean it. But tell me a time, and if you can think back for yourself, when you saw something where the government tried something new and it didn't work out, and you were complaining to your friends at dinner that they tried something new and it didn't work out. Right? The way we're structured right now is that the government creates, and you were talking about this, I think yesterday, Jen, with the sort of waterfall process. Everyone has to create 5-year process. Everyone has to create 5-year plans. Everyone has to do things in a really big way. But in actuality, and this is where civic entrepreneurship comes in, where's the opportunity for small bets to be able to see if something is working or not, and then the support from the citizens as well as from the government to invest in those things. Because we all get mad when government tries something and it fails. And yet we're not we're not necessarily all running up there saying, yes, you know what, we're pissed off that government has tried something big and it failed. Let's make sure you try something smaller next time and go a little out there and let's see if it works, and then let's invest in it. There's no huge lobby for that. And hopefully, candidly, I think one of the great things about the fellowship types of programs, about these programs that are involving people, is that you get enough people who have been engaged in government meaningfully for a year or for whatever it is, that they start saying, hey, we actually want to change this stuff on the ground. We don't want to just talk about it at coffee, at a coffee or at a cocktail party. We really want to get in there and make some of that change.
Can I say 2 quick things without dominating?
We're a little excited.
Just 2 actionable things. Was anybody in Larry Lessig's talk earlier? Can each of you who has your hand up be sure to talk to somebody else here about what he asked us to do? That is an absolutely actionable thing that we could do to change our political system, and it's hugely important. I'm not going to go into it now. And second of all, I think a fundamental thing that moves this area forward is the belief that change is possible and that government can work. And to that note, Mike Bracken in the white shirt just came in. He has basically turned the ship that we have been trying to turn in the US government in the UK, and he is speaking at 2:40, and you can come hear how it's possible, and you will absolutely then believe that we can do it. We just need to try harder.
Would you like to give us a quick 10-second take on what you're going to be talking about at 2:40? Sorry to put you on it. Sorry to put you.
Thanks for that. We won't be talking about drones, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, or robots. We'll be talking about tax systems, benefits, and users, and the sort of many small steps you can take to change things in 2 or 3 years. I have no doubt that that can be done here as well. So it's a lot of practical stuff about how we've done it and about how that's transferable to any other country, and indeed how it's happening all over the world, many other countries going faster than us. So I think the US has got a great opportunity to look at not just us but other countries as well.
So that's at 2:40, and the name of the panel is, we're, a little promotion.
It's called GovStack, and it's our version of government as a platform.
Very good.
At this point, I can't remember where the room is, but it's on at 2:40.
That's good enough. We can look it up. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Okay, let's continue with some questions. Right here, Mike is there.
Good morning. This question is directed to Tom. And I know that Allstate sponsored the production of Chicagoland on CNN. And I'm curious to know if after that show aired, if it drove any action on the part of Chicago businesses or citizens to somehow get more involved.
Tom, and I would ask before you answer that if you could just explain a little bit about what Chicagoland is.
Chicagoland was is an 8-part series done on CNN about Chicago and the challenges that any city faces, whether that's crime, education, politics, and financial issues. So, and we sponsored it with CNN. To answer your question, Chicago's pretty engaged anyway. So we have a model in Chicago which I think is unique. I think it could be copied other places, and it's called the Civic Committee. It's about civic engagement. We have maybe a group of 50 businesses who participate in that. We get together about every 2 months. We've taken on everything from charter schools, third runway at O'Hare, transportation, violence reduction, and we have, so we harness together those corporations' resources. And so in violence, I get asked to take on the violence stuff. We have a group called the Civic Consulting Alliance, which think of it as a McKinsey-like people who only work on our cities-based stuff. And they're very sophisticated. They know what they're doing. They came in, did a whole bunch of work on violence reduction, what's done in other places. We then got a bunch of pro bono work from those companies, about $3 million worth of pro bono work. We then went on to raise $50 million to invest over 5 years with Tony Irving leading it. And so we didn't really need that inspiration, but I would think that is something, it's a model easily replicable in every other city. So there's a guy who left Chicago, is trying to do one in New York right now, and Alexander Sherman, and there's a variety of places. You could do it other places, and it's just about creating some vehicle where people come together, and it makes a real difference in Chicago.
So did you see change as a result of this series?
As a result of the series, not really. Actually, the series for us was more of a media buy. We knew CNN wanted to make it successful. It's our hometown. We got a good deal on it. It wasn't that we thought like it was going to change. And some people like it, some people don't. Some people think it's Rahm Emanuel's testament to run for higher office. So there was a lot of controversy around it. But what it did.
It's a great question.
Yeah, what it did do though was I've been in other cities because we do business in every city in the country. And Stephen, I would say I'm not as enamored with federal change as I am with local change. Mm-hmm. And other people in other cities have said to me, we have the same problems. We need to figure out how to address them. So at least it raised the awareness.
And raising awareness is always good, right? At the very least.
It wasn't? Okay. So first on the Lessig lecture earlier, if people can just go to mayday.us, you'll learn exactly what it's about, mayday.us. So I encourage everyone here to take a look at it. I did it while I was in the lecture, and I pledged right away. So relative to the local excitement, I'm really glad you touched on that, because I used to work for Mayor Landrieu I work with your team, Jennifer, with the Code for Enforcement. I headed up his his neighborhood engagement office, which he initiated. It was a new office in city government. And one of the challenges, my work was to obviously, connect with the neighbors, with the entire community. So I focused on the neighborhood association presidents as the first string of people to work with. They want to be involved and they want to work with government. At the local level is where it's at for a lot of people. And there's a lot of opportunity for innovation and change and work going on in city government at the local level. The challenges that I found, and I want you guys to speak to this, is there are different ways that people can get engaged outside of government and within government. But what I found a lot was you really have to do a lot of work, whether government participates or not, and trying to figure out how to bridge these two sort of groups that don't understand each other. And a lot of the folks in the public side who are not involved in government really don't understand the processes of how government works, don't understand, as you said earlier in your lecture earlier this morning, or one of your fellow panelists said, there's so many different entities within local government. One of my challenges was just educating people about what actually falls under the mayor's purview and what doesn't. And then how to engage those, because sometimes, in New Orleans, for example, the mayor has no authority over education, but people thought he did, or he has no authority over the sewage and water, and they thought he did. So it's very challenging just to figure out how to get people who are interested to then actually be productive in that interaction, because they don't know who to go to. And then the other element to that is people actually want to just change it because they think it doesn't work. And my premise was, when I was there, and it still is, that it can work, just figure out how to work with it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
So absolutely, you have to have that translation layer, and you have to give people a way to plug in. I would add to your description of the problem, the government tends to communicate in language that is very hard to penetrate. One of the projects we did last year with City and County of San Francisco was working on their food stamps program, and we had the fellows, they chose to enroll in the program, so they got to see what it's like to actually experience what it's like to be in the program. And it wasn't that food stamps are bad, it's that once you enroll, you start getting these letters. And they're up online if I could figure out the URL. We documented all of the communications we got from the county about our food stamps application. You start getting these letters, and I'm an educated middle-class woman. I cannot understand anything any of these letters say. So imagine you are a working mom with kids and you don't have time. I mean, it was nuts. Our fellows, whose job it was to do this, fell off the rolls 4 or 5 times because the language is so impenetrable, and they'd have to call and get enrolled. And again, so the end of that story is that they ended up doing this text message thing where now if you're about to fall off the rolls, you get a text message that says your CalFresh benefits are about to end, questions, call us. It doesn't actually fix the problem. They still get these ridiculous letters that are not only confusing, by the way, but frankly insulting. And so changing the language in which government speaks to citizens is probably the lowest hanging fruit we have here. There's a million different places that we can do this. But the second thing, and I think, again, to give a little bit of a plug for Mike and Ade in the back from the Government Digital Service, is like if government were a company, no company would be like, you have to talk. I mean, think about between just the number of departments at the local level, county, federal, the transit districts, and then you go into state. And if no company would tell you that you've got to communicate with them through all of the different branches, they all start with the fact that they all have different logos, the fact that they all have different rules. It's not so. And so trying to pull that together and saying, we are one government, even if you just start at the city level, this idea that there should be a front door that you could go through, and you're not going to have walked into the wrong place. Someone will get you where you need to go. We have to stop communicating what government needs and government structure are, and start communicating, we're here to help you, here's how you're going to get the service. And it does involve busting a lot of silos, which is incredibly hard to do.
Right, and it's incredibly hard to do. And so I'd like to ask everybody on the panel, how then, as we look forward, how can individuals engage to start to break down some of those silos and to start moving this conversation forward? What is something each of us can do? Steve, you start.
Okay, I'll start.
That was you.
Well, I think number one thing I'm very excited about is we were talking about Larry Lessig's campaign on money and politics. He recently published a great piece in The Atlantic making the cross-partisan case for campaign finance reform. And all right, we're going to get an applause there. Well, the point here is that you have to put yourself outside of your comfort zone in our democracy. Because from our founding, this has been a country that grew its sense of who we are, who us is. And we were always willing to find ways to cooperate with those who disagreed with us. So the first and probably the most important thing that I would say is as you are engaging in a whole range of ways in our democracy, going to your local city council meeting, hopefully doing a lot more than voting, perhaps even running for office, participating in one of the government fellowship programs, or even engaging in your local community through a service project, being part of Teach for America or AmeriCorps, making sure that you are part of a larger community and you're putting yourself within a community of diversity. I think civic engagement is the most powerful force that we have to transcend racial, political, religious, ethnic, and a whole range of lines that divide our country.
I'm going to refer to something that I heard Todd Park say quite recently, which is thinking about that we can't wait until government is fixed before we get involved to make it better. We can't wait till next year. We can't wait till later. It needs to be now. And what's really exciting and I think interesting is having the panelists that you have up here. These are all individuals who are part of organizations or have been part of organizations who are working on engaging folks, whether they be at the millennial level, whether they be at somewhere between 30, 60, whatever, in the Fuse Corps' mind, whether they be techies, whether they be at all state. I mean, these are all folks who have created organizations to help make it easier for folks to get engaged in government. So I would really urge you to find out more about what I'm really calling a movement to get folks who aren't currently as engaged, more engaged in civic entrepreneurship, and to do it when you leave, or to do it right now on your phone as you stare at it and tweet. But this is, right now, we're at such a unique time, whereas I was saying, governments are ready. And they really want to do this. And in fact, they want partnership with folks who are outside of government. It's just that they haven't gotten it yet. And they haven't been able to see the hope that Jen was talking about earlier that hopefully you all can see now. Tom?
I'd say two things, recognition and your personal leadership. So recognition, of course, we have thousands of employees who are engaged in this kind of stuff. And there's one of the things, there's not easy on-ramps, and I'm not being pejorative, but I think you have good, clean on-ramps to get involved, and you have a good, clean volunteer value proposition. A lot of people don't know how to get engaged, and they don't know if you get involved in an organization, but what's missing is also recognition. Yeah. And so letting people know public recognition, not just you feel good recognition because you went to a meeting and doing something, but I think we could do more in recognition. You could recognize those people who are civically engaged and celebrate them. Leadership, I think everybody's a leader. I think leadership is getting others to willingly go where they would not go by themselves. It's easy in civic engagement to have an idea, to have an opinion. It's more difficult to take that idea or opinion and go out and try to convince other people. So I think you could rise up, get other people to go with. All change has started small. All change takes a long time. It took 75 years for the women to get the right to vote. It started with small protests and marches, and eventually we made a huge difference. But it's just us. If you're looking for somebody else to lead in civic engagement or anybody else, I may be a little more pessimistic about the government. I think the government's completely broken. And I'm like, if we don't, it's hard to complain about it if you're not willing to do something about it. If you're willing to do something about it and willing to take the risk of being a leader, leading other people where they wouldn't go, then I think that'll make a difference.
You mean we just can't complain?
No, well, I do often, but I don't think it's fair, to be honest. But
that would ruin my whole dinner conversation. Sorry. Jen, go ahead.
You have to be able to complain too.
Right.
But the cost of complaining is you better do something about it. So definitely to your point about recognition, just +1 on that. And then to your point about on-ramps, if I could tell a very brief story. In 2012, we had a team in the city county of Honolulu, and you have a small team of people, they've got 11 months, they really can't do an enormous project. But what they kept hearing was the city's website is just absolutely terrible. And we're like, we don't do websites. There's something like 30,000 pages of content on this website. There's no way we can deal with this. So, but they kept hearing this was a problem, and if you go on the Honolulu site at the time and you typed in driver's license, and that makes no sense, in Honolulu, in Hawaii, the city and county actually does the driver's license. It's a state function elsewhere, but they do it. You would get back about 30 pages of content that talk about driver's licenses. There is not a page among those 30 that would tell you how to get one or how to renew one. So this is a common problem in government. And the fellows ultimately decided to just rip off, again, what the folks in the UK were doing, but they did it from a very bottom-up perspective. They couldn't do it, they couldn't just say, we're gonna do a whole new website. But what they had done is said, we're gonna stop having departments communicate directly to citizens, and we're gonna say, what do citizens actually need to know? So it's user-centered design. If IDEO was here talking about that a lot. What do they actually need? And said, instead, because we don't have the resources, we're gonna get the citizens of Honolulu together to do it. So has anyone here heard of a hackathon? Okay, this is where techies come together for a day and make an app. This was a write-a-thon. The techies wrote the app, and they invited the community in to rewrite the entire website, well, most of the actual usable content of the website in their own words. So they rewrote the page about how you would go get a driver's license or how you get a bus pass, all of this stuff. And it was far, far smaller, but far, far more useful. And then because our engagement with the city of Honolulu ended, this brigade, this group of citizens that just do this in their spare time took it on. And so where we can't wait for government, there's absolutely ways to do that on your own. You can, I guarantee you, if you have a brigade in your community, and there's 50 of them around the country, Code for Mayor brigades, you can redo the website of your city in such a way that you can find the information you need, and all of your community members can do the same. And maybe that's not solving the world's problems, but it's showing that it can be done because we can do it.
Yeah, and I want to expand on that a little bit, because Jennifer, you say the time is now. Tom, you mentioned that people often don't know how to get engaged, and I believe that is absolutely right. Jen, I want you to expand on what you were saying. What is something concrete that people can do right now? There are no more excuses. Getting involved has become easier. What's your best advice? And I want to just get a quick response from each of you. We just have a couple of minutes remaining.
Well, I mean, honestly, really concretely, go to, I'm sorry this is going to sound like such a pitch, but it's very concrete. You can go to codeforamerica.org/brigade, see if there's one in your city, and then offer your help. And if there isn't, you can start one. Some of them are doing different projects. A lot of them are opening the data of their city. That sounds a little techie, but there's a ton of stuff that anybody can do. If you can write a decent English sentence, or actually not English, but translate the content into the language that people in your city read, then you can help. But again, I think paying attention to local politics and looking for where somebody is paying attention to the implementation, not just the policy, is also really critical.
Great. Tom?
My answer would be do anything. Find something you have a passion for. Do it. Because I think in part it's about cultural change. If you look at America, whether it's what's happened with technological change, how complicated the world is today, whether it's two working parents in a family, the amount of civic engagement from local communities, PTAs, everything else has gone down. And so we need to turn that tide. Businesses have oftentimes kept their heads down because they're like, don't stick your head up, because then they'll pass some law that'll take your business profits away from you, so you don't do anything. So my answer would be just find something you like, do it. It doesn't have to be big. All big changes started small. All big changes started with some small minority group of people who had a passion for something, and they built it, whether it's code or Fuse or something like that. So I'd be like, choose anything. Just do something.
Jennifer?
So 3 things, and also will sound like a pitch. But 3 things.
We take promotion. It's okay.
Excellent. Okay. I'd like to promote 240. But 3 things. So 1, think about those folks that you know who would be amazing as a senior advisor, who have executive level experience, who would be amazing as a senior advisor to a mayor or a governor who have business experience, and send me an email or go to fusecorps.org and send them an email. But send us an email and let us know who those folks are, because those sorts of recommendations are what help us get to the high quality of executive level folks that we get. 1. 2, you live in a city, you live in a state. We have someone who, for the first time ever, the state of California now has someone who is overseeing education technology. That's sad and that's amazing. Right? So there are people who were working on education technology before, but right now they have someone who spent 14 years building an education technology company and is now working with Superintendent Torlakson, the Superintendent of Public Schools, to help bring education technology to kids throughout the state. If you have an expertise in any of the things that our fellows are doing, education, trash in LA, and economic development, you can be a mentor. You can help us help them do a great job, because they have decided to commit a full year of their lives. That's 2. And 3, what Tom said.
Okay, fair enough. Stephen, last thought.
Well, I'll also second or third what Tom said too.
I'm going to go for a 4th.
I'm in.
There we go.
Well, I think we're all in. That's why we're up here.
And the truth of it is, each of us are passionate about different issues. Each of us live in different parts of the country, and we're all excited about different levels of engagement, whether it's in government or in the private sector. So being involved, period, and making sure you're involved and making sure that complements any criticisms you have for current civic culture is very important. The one concrete thing I'll say is we're coming to a state in your state. In fact, wherever your state is, we're coming there, because we're in 4 states right now, and we're building these caucuses. And as Tom mentioned, the most action is at the local and the state level. I'll just give one quick example. Our Colorado caucus sponsored and signed into law the nation's first legislation to embrace Uber, and that was bipartisan and is very innovative, that we're very proud of. So make sure that you're supporting those who are modeling the leadership that you want to see, whether it's just financially or in other ways, saying that that's what we want to see in our democracy. And the last point I'll make on the time is now point is, when our founders made the impact that would change the course of history, they were not in their 70s or 80s. They were in their 20s and 30s. And Jefferson submitted the Declaration of Independence to the Continental Congress when he was 33 years old. So that's my pitch, especially for the millennials in the audience, is the best change has always happened when especially the younger people were willing to transform our country, to take risks, and to get involved.
Always nice to end with a little Thomas Jefferson. I'd like to thank our panelists, Jennifer Polka, Tom Wilson, Jennifer Anastasoff, Stephen Olakara. Thank you, all of you, for your insights. We appreciate it. To you, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.